Do you have a favorite?
Not meant to. But mostly the unloved ones. The unvisited ones. The cases that get dusty and ignored. All the broken and shunned creatures. Someone's got to care for them. Who shall it be if not us?
Yes.
Welcome to Rune Soup, a weekly podcast about magic, culture, and the very best new and old ideas for living in this world. Coming to you from 43 degrees south on a small farm in deepest Tasmania. My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. Now, I know I promised a solo show on my experiences so far with this 53,000 hectare fire encircling the farm, but a few hours ago it occurred to me there might be a way of framing the experience in such a fashion that it might be more useful or at least magically interesting. So, with very little notice and coming off another podcast recording, Austin agreed to pull a chart together for Tasmania, and we use an analysis of that as a frame for discussing my experiences so far. It's not technical, I mean, how could it be if I'm involved? But for you astronerds out there, the Aries and Libra ingress charts for Hobart, as well as the base chart we drew up for Tasmania, are all in the show notes with Austin's commentary for you to space math your little hearts out with. Before we begin, you have probably already worked out that I am not recording in my usual office, nor could I if I wanted to because all the roads are closed. I'm staying at a friend's place on the other side of the Huon River from the fires while he's on holiday. And while I'm very grateful to be making use of his lovely home is also very echoey. It's basically one of those big, fancy, one-room, hardwood floor, sort of Swedish-ish coastal deals. So apologies for the sound. I hope just as much as you do that the next episode will sound exactly the same as it always does. So let's do it. Activating the emergency Austin broadcast system. Mr. Kopic, thanks for coming back.
Oh, Mr. White, it's my pleasure.
Yeah.
So what's been going on lately? Doing much?
Not much. It's been a bit warm.
Yeah, what's the weather like?
33,000. I think it's 40,000 hectares of fire right now. It got to within a mile, give or take, of the farm over a rather steep hill, and it's sitting. There's a small fire that's about 2 miles away that hasn't left the forest in 48 hours, as I could tell in the last Tasmania Fire Service broadcast. So, yeah, you know me in apocalypses.
I do. And we're all getting to know you in apocalypses a little bit better, I suppose.
Yes.
Mr. White, tell me about your experience, your history with apocalypses. Apocalypse.
Apocalypse. Well, I just keep showing up to bear witness to them. The closest one to this, in a funny way, is sort of the financial version, because showing up in London a couple of weeks before Lehman Brothers and kind of comparing that to the fraught situation property-wise at the moment. That one was actually much worse because it literally took everything. Like the day before I started the job at the BBC, I had £1 left, and so I went into Tesco and bought a £1 ham sandwich, and I went back to the apartment that I just rented earlier that day, and the heating wasn't working, and it was the middle of winter, and it was a cold snap, and so I basically got everything out of the suitcase and piled on the bed like a sort of Viking funeral, blankets and coats. And got up and knocked on my neighbour's door to use their shower in the morning, and then went to work for my first day at the BBC, pretending everything was normal. So last time, that was my Saturn return, we've spoken about that, but last time it took everything. This time, the worst case scenario, because we're heavily insured, is in fact a lot better.
Yeah, right. Well, I suppose, and we are exactly 1/4 of a Saturn cycle from that Saturn return time, but it's on the quarter.
Gotcha. And we were looking at my space weather for between birthdays, so I'm kind of halfway and a bit through that as well. And what sort of jumped out was, for me in particular, the eclipses in January, and here we are.
Yeah, I think we talked about. I think I read for you back in. I don't know. Was it maybe September?
No, it was
like a little after your.
Yeah,
or was
but
it
not
close
by
to your
much.
birthday?
Yeah, it was like closer to July. And one of the things, a lot of the planetary activity was sort of front loaded into 2018, but looking at 2019, like the biggest wobble up until the meat grinder are these January eclipses.
And so they have been. They've been pretty unkind. I mean, they've been most unkind to you, but on a less dramatic, sort of on a less dramatic scale. This month has been what I wrote about it being, and what I kind of hoped it would. I kind of hoped it would be better than that, but sometimes, and I guess that's one thing that's nice about being a reasonably pessimistic, realistic astrologer, is if you're wrong and it's better than you thought, then you get that. But if it's shit, then at least you have the satisfaction of being right.
This is just genuinely good fortune-telling advice, even for card readers.
It's not just astrologers.
And depending on which country you're from, it's harder for Americans because you are generally a sunnier people than Europeans, and then you kind of have to lean into that and go, no, always start with the negative, or always err on the side of it being bad in any kind of divination, because you get the upside if you're wrong. It's good to be wrong in that direction.
Yeah, well, it's a way of building a consolation prize into tough times, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was intending to do.
Well, actually, I want to, before we move on, I think there's more to you in apocalypses than just that one thing that happened before. You kind of wrote a book several years ago that was basically how to navigate an apocalypse.
Yeah, Apocalypse is my actual sect. None of this day chart, night chart. I shine, it seems, in apocalypses. And to be honest, this one, it's been really fascinating. I got back from my sort of lecture tour of, there were like 3 lectures on the east coast of Australia on Sunday week ago, and we drove into the valley and it smelled of smoke. And I kind of knew. And on that Monday, we've talked you through the cards. We'll get to it later in the show. The cards were accurate day to day to day to day up until the Friday. And I haven't done any since then. That's why they haven't got less accurate. I'm just not doing it again. And that actually gave me a lot of time to lean into how I'm going to navigate this, and even find, dare I say, almost like the joy in it. I do seem to... Parts of me flourish in these sort of situations. The apocalyptic situations for me are, well, maybe joy rather than exaltation, if we're going to use that term.
I think that's exactly right.
Yeah. So, it's been really fascinating. And, we've had to be evacuated we evacuated ourselves 3 times. It's quite a fascinating experience. And I guess this is a hard one thing, because I've lost everything before, and we've moved so many times that we're actually more rigorous. James and I are more rigorous than we realize with our belongings. So on the Tuesday, I went through the books and didn't even pack my favorites, because they can be replaced, more or less. I packed the ones over the last 20 years that literally cannot be replaced, because they're sort of 1890s herbals that are, out of print and so on. So even with the insurance money, you're like, I actually cannot get that ever again. So yeah. I have my old Peugeot, which, because this is how my apocalypses work now, doesn't start every time you turn it on, which is what you want as you're driving a boot full of rare books through a firestorm, just to add a little extra spice to it. But yeah, so other than that, once I got them in, we spent a couple of hours going around the house and looking for, and you do your documents, right? And then looking for the things that are sentimental, like what absolutely cannot perish in a fire. And that's a very small suitcase.
So this is like Apocalypse Marie Kondo.
Yeah, I got the demonic
Right,
version.
like you can only take one suitcase full of things. What are you not willing to let burn in a fire?
Yeah, and they're all the usual stuff. So they're all kind of European things. And valueless in that classic way of things that bring you joy, right? Because one of them is like a Tuscan olive wood cheese board that I bought James when we were in Lucca in Tuscany for his 30th birthday. I'm like, well, I've left behind several computers and I have a chunk of wood. But that was a really interesting experience. And I know a lot of people, which I'm very grateful for, have reached out who've been in similar situations in, California and Oregon and even Australia, which permanently catches fire. And they say, oh, no, I know exactly what you're going through. And it's oddly, healing's the wrong word. It is a trigger for growth to have to work out what things and how few of them there really are. To the point, because we've been and come back a few times, and we can't. The roads are closed, can't even get anywhere near it. The last time we went back, there was still room in the car. It's basically because we had to hurriedly evacuate on the Saturday night, and we went back on the Monday. And it's because we'd forgotten our pillows, and like if we're going to be homeless, it's like, well, we should probably have our pillows, right? Because hotel pillows are never quite what you want. So we sort of packed those pillows, and James, because he processes anxiety differently, he spent all last week just working, which was very frustrating for me because thank God my neighbor Avalon processes anxiety in a similar way to me, so we could talk to each other. And I didn't get in his way over it because that's literally how he's processing anxiety. He's just going to work. Yeah. And so when we left the first time, and because I know what's coming and he didn't. Well, he was worried about it, but I know what's coming. And we're driving back up the valley on our first evacuation, and he's like, "No, I should have taken some of that plum jam I made." And that's just, that's when James can break your heart into a million pieces because he's not emoting it like I am, but that was a valueless thing that he wanted to take with him. So on the Monday when we went back, we basically got 2 pillows and some of the plum jam, which we may not be able to ever make again. And he does it that way. It's, but I still forced him into it because I think this is psychologically healing, although it may sound cruel to people who have a similar personality type to him. So we had about 4 bags of stuff, and I took 3 bags out, and he was at the car. And this is Monday, and he asks, is that it? And I said, no, there's another bag left in the hallway, and I want you to go in and spend a few moments in the house on your own, and then come back out when you're ready. And he obviously came out a mess, and he thanked me for it, but he's like, no, thank you. And I'm like, well, good. This is, you're getting your apocalypse teachings from the guy who wrote the book on it. But yeah, there's only so far you can use work to avoid facing the situation as an anxiety remediator. You actually have to, at some stage, look at the risk of it.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I think we all need whatever our anxiety processing mechanism is to get to a state where we can look at it without an anxiety tornado blowing our thoughts around.
Well, that's why I didn't have Adam all last week. I just went around the business of planning our current exiled state. So, but he had to look at it. He had to face that once we're all done and safe. And he's now gone back to Sydney because, as I said in the post, if people are unaware, I've been writing the last few blog posts about it. If you just listen to the show and don't read the blog, just jump on over and get the backstory of it. But he's returned to the mainland because he had actually an extremely important week. And the thing is, because James and I kind of like the win, I'm like, well, let's not have the fire burn down your career. We may well need it. So given that if we lose the guest accommodation, y'all are still going to be working. So we have that kind of hyper-pragmatism to it. So, but it could only be this way. We've been talking about it before we hit record, that I would end up down here on my own in a place called Gordon with the fire emerging on the exact fucking road on the hill, like that property that we looked at and almost bought, is gone, and the rest.
Oh,
of the
really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, I've been following the story. I've seen pictures of that burning.
Yes. So there's no structures on it. It was a 20-acre paddock on the top of a hill above Franklin.
Okay. I saw a nearby barn burn then.
Yes, there are houses on that road that we didn't look at that burned. And actually, when we were looking at it, there was a guy living he was sort of a year ahead of us in the Permi journey. He had like a temporary tiny house situation going on, and there was some young fruit trees, and they said a couple of structures up there have been burned, and I'm like, no, I hope it's not that. Like, no one's died, but like, I hope it's not the Permi guy embarking on his Permi dream. Well, I hope it's not anyone. But yeah, so it's been really interesting how, and just very astrological in a way, just very fate-based in a way, that it's me down here alone in a little hamlet called Gordon. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and what the creatures that came to rest in the nearby water, right? You had black swans visit you in your little exile base.
Yeah, so when I actually got to Gordon yesterday, usually you can see, and this is a testament to the premium members' magic, which we'll get to, but black swans are in the general South Huon area, but there were none in front of this bit of the coastline on the channel. And then I get here, and they're all congregating basically in like the property line. There was about 8 of them. I counted; it wasn't exactly 8, but which would have been fun. But basically, in the boundaries of this property line going into the water, there are black swans gathering, and I'm like, yep, that's about right.
Yeah, good God. Yeah, if chaos magic had an animal.
Yes. Yeah. So it's been really, really exciting, and I thought I was just going to do a solo show and update people on it. But the reality is, this is where we jump into a little bit of astrology. This is going to go on for a while. Whether, my place or Avalon's place or whatever goes up this afternoon or in the wee hours of this morning, that's the next kind of risk spot, depending on when you're listening to this. But this is a giant fire, and there is no decent rain coming for at least a week and a half. And in fact, February is the typical bushfire season for Tasmania, and we're not even in it yet. And there's, at last count, it was 960 kilometers of fire front on an island that's only 320 kilometers wide. So it's already mostly burning as we head into bushfire season. So I'm like, there's probably a better way than just a solo show, given that the story has further to run yet. And I thought, I know. I wonder if I know anyone who can look at Tasmania's chart. And I didn't. And then we were talking on Skype, and I said, do you want to do it? And you said yes.
Yeah, right. Well, second in line.
Yeah.
Second the only person in line, and yet somehow second.
Yeah. So how do we do this? I mean, do we want to tell people what mundane astrology is, or do we assume that they know?
Yeah, we can say a few things. So we talked about this beforehand. I'm going to try to walk the line between being comprehensible to people who aren't into it, and also dropping some kind of sweet treats for astro nerds. I was thinking maybe when you put this up, it'd be fun to have the chart dates that we're working from for people who are interested in that. But yeah, let's see. Where do we start? Well, so, okay. Yeah. Where we start with what is mundane astrology. And I apologize to everybody who has to listen to me for I'm somewhat inarticulate today. I already did 3 hours of podcasting, and I thought I was done with my day.
Are you having a bad day?
No, I'm not having a bad day. I'm just,
that was me. That was me going for the sympathy. Come on.
Yeah. Yes. Gordon is having a worse day than I am.
Damn right.
However, the symptoms of my symptoms include only kind of running out of words. I'll try to keep them coming. But anyway, I get embarrassed when I feel inarticulate. Anyway, so mundane astrology, mundus, right? Mundi, it's the astrology of the world, right? And so some of what you and I talk about on Rune Soup would be the political human side of mundane astrology. it's the way that the configuration of the heavens affects, broad swaths of people, during a given time period, right? And then there's another whole side to that, which is weather and natural disaster and feast and famine and good crops and bad crops, which is inevitably has to be more local. And so there's a battery of techniques which have been used pretty consistently since at least the Persian influx into astrology, like 7th, 8th, or let's say 8th, 9th century, Common Era. And so we ran the charts for those traditional techniques, and then I'm pretty sure between us two, we figured out a pretty perfect chart for Tasmania that has both a good astrological rationale and a solid. That makes sense. That's probably the moment that Tasmania as the current human-Earth hybrid that it is, came into existence.
Yes, it's actually probably the most difficult state in Australia to, you could argue the toss in a lot of ways. You have to have a reasonable knowledge of colonial history, and fortunately I do. So because it was first sighted by Europeans in the mid-1600s, and that was the Dutch, you can kind of go all the way back to, well, is that Tasmania as a international entity at that point? No. And there's a moment in between when London allowed the colonies to have a sort of dual legislative council. So some were elected and some were appointed. And that particular legislative council passed essentially a constitution. And you'll find these landing coordinates for Tasmania, if you will, as well as a screen grab of the chart in the show notes. And that, to me, so it's still called Van Diemen's Land at that point, because the other option was a couple of years later, this same council officially changes the name. But that's a thing that an entity does. So it seems to me that as soon as it is able to assert its own sovereignty and describe itself, it's sort of like articles of incorporation if you're doing a chart for a corporation. The point for Tasmania was then when they passed a constitution.
Well, I think you said it perfectly with it's able to assert its own will over itself. You know, that's in some ways that's a good parallel to when a human is born.
Yes.
Right. And it's not an oddly shaped appendage of the mother anymore.
Yeah. So, and we kind of went backwards and forwards. We've made the assumption, and I think it's a good one, that it was first order of business for the council, because you don't tend to argue it and then pass it in the middle of the night. These things are generally ceremonial, and I don't think they were busying themselves with handing out like horse parking tickets beforehand. So I think 10 a.m. is what we picked. I couldn't find it. I looked. But when we put in 10 a.m., the rising sign looks correct and what have you, because this is a very agricultural place and is known as it. So,
well, and it also, so that gives us a Capricorn rising. So it's Saturn ruled. Like, this is a place that was largely colonized by exiles and criminals.
Oh, and yes.
So that's Saturn, right? And what's interesting is that we have Jupiter right off the ascendant. And so, there's a certain optimism and, positivity and all that. But Jupiter is considered to be fallen in Capricorn. So it's positivity, optimism from literally the lowest point possible. And I only spent a week there, but it does seem like there's this, we might have been exiled here and gone through hell on 3 continents, but like, we're going to make good. There's like a weird Tasmanian maybe it's not weird, but there seems like there's a species of Tasmanian optimism that a fallen Jupiter on the ascendant might describe well. It's
perfect because it's a muted optimism because they're aware, and it's not in a shame sense. It's just they're aware of what they are. They're aware that it's really exciting that we can make good food and, look at our new museum and what have you. And so it's exciting, but it's still Tasmania. But it has to be Saturn ruled. It's not just a place of convicts and exiles. I mean, there's obviously the punishment and judgment component to that, but it was the last place in the entire empire that still had deportation. So as they were closing down the rest of the sort of penal colonies around the empire, everyone was sent here, and this was the last place it was still legal. So it's the last of that kind of imperial deportation. And if you guys have done the magical geography course, it is also ground zero for the most successful imperial genocide of the entire British Empire. So when at 10 a.m. on whatever it was, October 31st, so Halloween, I think it was 1854, wasn't it? Was it later than that?
Yeah, that's what I have.
Yeah.
No, that's what I have.
Yeah. So on Halloween, it gets its Saturn-ruled birth, and of course, it's like Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah, well, and so there were a couple things about this that made me say, this seems right. One, Saturn is, and I forgot to mute my phone. One, Saturn is in an almost perfect opposition with Mars, right? We have Mars at 14 Sag and Saturn at 14 Gemini. And so Mars-Saturn oppositions are just plain nasty. When you have when you have both malefics opposed to each other, it describes, as bad as things can get. And we have that Saturn. That Saturn is ruling the first from the sixth, which is actually the traditional house of where you see like people who are in a shit situation, who have to serve other people, like forced labor because you're a convict, et cetera, et cetera. It describes the origin of the colony very well. In addition to that, this was about 5 days before a lunar eclipse. Tasmania was born common in the lead up to a lunar eclipse in Taurus on the Dragon's Head. And that's particularly interesting because basically it was a lunar eclipse on the Dragon's Head when the fires got really bad. They didn't start on the lunar eclipse, but that's when everything kicked into emergency mode. Now, we
were the only people in the southern hemisphere to get a blood moon, because obviously the eclipse was at 2 p.m. or whatever it was here. And then rising over the valley, we get our own blood moon. Yeah, so yes.
Well, and just as an aside, one part of eclipse theory is that, or one school of thinking is that, you get effects in the places that it's visible. But my first experience of an eclipse that made me think that there might be something to it astrologically was when I was maybe 20 years old, and I was watching a presentation of a series of student films, and I had the weirdest, darkest, most awful feeling in my solar plexus. And this was like, 9 o'clock at night. And I did this little drawing of like a beam of light trying to hit my solar plexus and then being blocked or occluded. And then I found out a day or two later that there was a solar eclipse happening on the other side of the world at that point. And so I don't think that you necessarily need to be bathing in its effulgence in order for it to have an effect. I think that matters, but there's obviously an effect beyond physical proximity visibility.
In the same way, in reverse, that watching student films will also give you that disgusting feeling in your chest.
Well, no, but that would be like 2 inches lower in the stomach.
Yeah, true. Yeah,
and I had that too, but there's something a little higher. No, they were not good. So what's interesting is that with this chart, if the cap rising is reasonable, if that's correct, we don't know. We don't have to pretend that has to be correct. No. But if it is, that gives us the fourth house of this chart as Aries, both whole sign and quadrant style. And when the fourth house of a chart is land, that's where you for a human being's chart, that's your relationship to the land you grew up in and the land that you might own. If you're into real estate, look at your fourth house. For a country, it has to do with the actual substance and body of the nation, right? And so if you're looking for, when you're looking for disasters, natural disasters, you always look at the fourth house, right? So in this chart, we have the suggestion there is that we have a Mars ruled fourth house. So the kind of dangers that this place would be most prone to would be fiery, right? And Mars is opposite Saturn in the natal, so that's there. What's interesting and kind of doubles down on that is the lightning storm that started all of these fires. What is it? You gave me the 14th and 15th, was it?
Yeah, it was about 1,500 dry lightning strikes Wednesday week ago. That was why we said 14th and 15th is it went overnight and sort of only stopped around midday the next day. So it was, it was impressive. Did
you say Wednesday a week ago? That would be 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I sent you the January 15th.
Yeah. It's been 2 weeks. I know it's
but isn't I'm sure that. Oh no, it is Wednesday here. Sorry. Yeah. I knew what you meant. Anyway, yes. Yeah. So mid January.
Yeah. And so what's interesting is what was happening then in the sky. Well, the moon was in Aries with Mars. So we have Mars. Mars is the burner, right? And so for about 6 weeks out of every 2 years, Mars is in Aries. And so since the beginning of January, we've had Mars in Aries. It's going to be in Aries until the 14th of February. And so that just happens to be Tasmania's fourth house or land place, right? And so the fire started when the moon was with Mars and Uranus, which is often described in lightning imagery, in Aries. And then you gave me permission to talk about your chart a little bit.
I did. I am officially lifting the royal ban.
All right. And of course, your moon is in Aries.
Yeah. And so what does that mean? Why is Moon and Aries and me significant?
Right. So Mars is the burner, right? Mars rules Aries, et cetera, et cetera. And so, for Tasmania in general, we would, if it's summertime and Mars is in Aries, we would look at potential fire conditions. This is the moon hitting it, right? So the moon does a lap every 27.3 days. And whenever it conjoins planets, it triggers whatever those positions are, right? Mars can be Mars is in Aries for 6 weeks, but it's when the moon hits it that you really see that, right? So the moon hits Mars in Aries for the first time since Mars has been in Aries during mid-January, dry lightning everywhere. And then, if we're looking for, and so we can, that's right in Tasmania's the fourth house, if we're not wrong about this chart. And then on a personal level, personal transit level, we're like, okay, what's going on for Gordon at this time? Oh, he has moon in a place that's kind of set on fire by Mars, right? And so that's a timing of whatever that Mars transit to the moon is going to bring. We're going to start to see it then. And the moon, of course, is the person's moon in astrology will show up as where you live, where you're comfortable, where home is. It's your home base, right?
Yeah.
And so what's crazy is I actually just got news today that another really good friend of mine who has moon in Aries had his apartment catch on fire.
Yeah, it's going around.
Well, if Aries moon. And that's because the moon is in Mars's sign in Aries moons are particularly prone to inflammation at a variety of levels, right? Both, like literally things catching on fire as well as more subtle physiological and, psychic levels. And you were on fire with work before that.
Oh, absolutely. And so the fires that are currently, tearing up the valley, they started mid-January. But there's one fire, the Gull River fire, that started actually before Christmas, that's still burning. So around the state, pretty much from the beginning of January, pretty much Mars and Aries, it's been on fire.
Yeah, I remember the first time you mentioned this to me, I was immediately brought back to some reading on traditional mundane astrology that I was doing. Shout out to Dr. Ben Dykes, who compiled a lot of the key writings on traditional techniques from the the Persian Arabic period of astrology, like 9th to, let's say, 8th to 11th century, but mostly 9th and 10th, or mostly 9th and 10th. And I was reading, I think it was Mashallah, who was just saying, okay, if there's a shitload of, and I'm paraphrasing here, if there's a shitload of fire in this chart and it's the summer, watch out. If there's a shitload of fire and it's winter, then you might have a mild winter. And, and vice versa. If you see a lot of indicators for excessive cold, but it's summer, then great, it's going to be a mild summer. And so, it just continuing to work on thinking about the same skies or the same planetary positions, but manifesting through opposite seasons. Right? If I see a bunch of, and it's been a very mild winter here.
So you're saying there is a lot of fire action in the sky, just for people who are listening who aren't up on their manstrology?
Yeah. There's been an...
obviously Mars and Aries.
Yeah, there's been a very... there's been an unusual amount of fire in the sky for almost all of January. So what happened? So it's just tracing the timeline, right? So we have the actual lightning strikes while the moon is in Aries with Mars, but things don't get gnarly until about a week later, and that's when we have the last lunar eclipse, and it's in a fire sign. We're not going to have lunar eclipses in a fire sign for a long time, but we have that, and then the moon spends the next 2.5 days in a fire sign, basically reigniting Mars, and also connecting with Venus and Jupiter, who are usually temperate by nature but are in a fire sign. And so that configuration where you have at least one planet in all 3 signs of the same element, in this case fire, is called a grand fire trine. And it just basically means there's a massive elemental dominance there. And so that was when shit got crazy down there.
That it did. And so, like, if you were to look at if we're right about these various charts, as I mentioned before, the bushfire season for Tasmania is typically all of February. I don't think we get any substantial rain that will do anything until about Thursday. I think it's a battle of the winds until then, and we'll come on to the magic part of that in a minute. But I have a sense that our situation will continue for 2 weeks. So, and that's about, if you were to look at this chart, would you say when Mars leaves Aries, that is my best estimation for when it will start to die down?
Yeah, well, so what's interesting, it's interesting that you're thinking that, because I just recorded the February monthly podcast with Chris and Kelly 3 hours ago, and one of the main gestalt overall points for February is we go from fire to total mud. It becomes all water and earth by about halfway into the month. Mercury, which is in air right now, which is in an air sign right now, which is Aquarius, which isn't fiery, but air feeds fire, as you are probably more aware of than ever. And then we've got Venus in a fire sign, and Jupiter in a fire sign, and Mars in a fire sign. And so by the middle of February, Mars is in an earth sign, Venus is in an earth sign, and Mercury's in a water sign. So all of that excessive heat and activity is just gone, and we actually have a very soggy basically next month after that, which I wasn't excited about until I became emotionally invested in this situation, and now I'm thinking soggy sounds really good.
Soggy sounds pretty good right now. Yeah. But so from a forecast perspective, that's sort of what I could that's sort of what I could sense. Now, I want to tell a couple of things about the magical response to this before I get around to thanking people and telling others what they can do. Now, when we were looking at the world, so when we were looking at H1, and also in my chart, we had a lot of, we spoke about kind of post-colonial, or ghosts from a post-colonial perspective. Right. So, and from memory, was there something about the new eclipse cycle? I don't have my own space weather in front of me that pings that on my chart, or was it the end of the last one? I think it's the new one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the new one. It's the one that that just began at the beginning of January. But the way that the eclipse cycles work is a lot of times you'll have a new one begin just before the old one ends. They're linked like that, like links in a chain, where the next one in a line actually has a portion of itself that's earlier than the link before it. If that makes sense? Like clasped hands. And so we began the new one, which is Saturn South Node in Capricorn, was January 5th. January 4th or 5th. And then we finished out the Leo Aquarius series about 2 weeks later.
So let me tell you, of a bunch of different stuff that I was throwing at defending the farm from a magical perspective last week in particular, although it's obviously certainly continued this week, because I did a card reading last week, which I'll get to, which was essentially, does the farm last till the end of the week? And I'll unpack that in a minute. And because the cards weren't good, they weren't conclusive, we've discussed them. Well, that's a wrong way of describing it. Anyway, so I didn't have, why the premium members are so amazing is not only do they have Magical Game, they took it upon themselves to throw a whole bunch of different intending and magic and so on at bringing rain to the Huon. And there's no rain predicted in these firestorms, and it did happen. It doesn't put out the fires, we only get like 2 to 5 mils. But what it does is cool the air and put moisture in the air, which minimizes ember strike, which is actually what destroys your houses anyway. But I'd been, and so had Mother, I've been working on the winds. And one of the things I did is I knew we were going to leave on the Thursday. So on the Wednesday and Thursday morning, I got some planetary time journeying done to try and get out there to in between the fire front that was still in the forest at the time and the town. And first of all, and this is how I could tell how many people were involved in this, there were these enormous beings like it was a Benetton ad of gods and spirits standing in between the town and the forest, but they weren't doing anything. And I'm like, that's how I knew it ends up hitting the town, which it since has, and very likely will again. Battle gets joined in the town, put it that way. But so what I started doing, other than trying to get the winds to flow in different directions rather than calm down, because I couldn't do that, and I couldn't do anything with the water, I started calling on the dead in the valley. And here's where it gets interesting, and this is the post-colonial ghost bit. Now, the settler dead were very amenable to helping. I've kind of had some familiarity with some of them from the various... We have so many graveyards in the valley. So that was probably an easier thing for me to do. And I thought, I'm going to push my luck. And I called on any willing native Tasmanian dead. And they came, and they threw themselves into the fire. As in, like, to be fuel. I'm like, that's interesting. Because I didn't tell Mother this when she's doing her own thing, and she has different language for it than we do, and all that, whatever. And she said she's been talking to some of the sort of nature guardian spirits to say, why are you letting this happen? Because Tasmania is this, Gondwana wilderness of giant trees. And it's like, you realize if you don't help with this, you're fucked. And they haven't been responsive. And I think there was a deal there. Now, let me tell you why that was odd, that experience with my perception of native Tasmanians that showed up. And I'm not saying all of them or whatever, not helping. Is this, as I mentioned before, this is ground zero for, this is the cruelest or sharpest edge of the imperial sword when it comes to treatments of native peoples around the world. This is where it happened, specifically in my valley. But also, this maelstrom had its worst days over Australia Day weekend. And for people outside of Australia, this is essentially an imperially created holiday to say, gee, thanks for dying in Gallipoli. And it marks the day that Captain Cook first showed up. But by the way, we never celebrated it until after the war. It's not like it's some long-running British tradition. The British themselves gave it to us as a way of attempting some sort of imperial cohesion after the war. Unsurprisingly, it has been a fraught political topic for about 20 years, and most, dare I say, woke people will refer to it as Invasion Day, because it is. And there are big movements to change the date, like, yes, let's have a national holiday, whatever, but how about we don't commemorate how about the commencement of genocide with a barbecue? How about we pick another day that's less disgusting, right? And so the firestorm races over over the kind of low point of imperial treatment on Australia Day. And my journeying experience was before that weekend. It was well before it. So just coming back to the imperial ghosts and post-colonial experience, that was one of the more interesting things of my so far, touch wood, so far successful campaign to keep the fire off the farm, because I've had other divinatory systems, which I can't talk about, but you know about, that have basically said the farm was supposed to go last week. Like the fire wanted the farm, and it's being held off by magic. So I've had a really interesting time. And in the blog post that came out yesterday, depending on when you're listening to this, people, I'll put it in the show notes. You'll actually see a map of where this giant fire is to the west of us. And there's this great big hole punched into this massive fire flank that's essentially straight northwest of Geeveston. And that's the direction of the prevailing wind. So all that effort of trying to calm the wind to the northwest has punched a hole in the fire. So it's working, but that hole should not have been there.
It looks like a mouth that can't quite get its jaws around Geeveston.
Yeah. And it's trying, so it's extended along the south.
But like, you know what someone's mouth or a dog's mouth looks like when they, they've got like a softball in there, or like they're trying to bite a basketball, and it's like the angle isn't right and they don't have the grip on it. Like that's what it looks like to me.
Yes, right now. So one of the things,
God willing,
exactly,
tomorrow and the next day and 3 weeks from now. By the way, I just wanted to provide a little bit more detail on that. Like, in 2 weeks, everything's water and earth.
Yeah.
So you don't have, it's not all 2 weeks. You get Venus Venus moves from a fire sign into Capricorn, which isn't necessarily like good in general as far as joy goes, but it's good in terms of temperature. In not very many days. That's going to be February 4th for you, February 3rd for me.
What day is that? And, is that Thursday?
That's going to be your Monday, your next month.
Too bad. Okay.
Yeah, and the day after that, we get a new moon that is not a goddamn eclipse. And that because right now we're like, you live whenever you have a new moon or a full moon, like that's what's up for the next 2 weeks until you have the next lunation. And eclipses do have a deeper imprint, but still just moving into a normal cycle of light and darkness rather than an eclipse cycle, especially a total lunar eclipse in a fire sign when everything else is in fire. It's good to move to just a normal ass new moon in Aquarius. So that happens on your 5th, my 4th. And then we get Mercury on your, let's see. Yeah, that's going to be your 11th. Actually, I think that's going to be both of our 10ths.
Okay.
And then we get Mars. And so Mars does make a conjunction with Uranus and Aries, which I don't love for this situation, but the other factors are all departing, like the excessive fire from the lunar eclipse, the Venus also being in a fire sign, Mercury adding air from Aquarius. Aquarius is an air sign, quick mnemonic for people. Aquarius is the water bearer, not the water itself. Clouds are water bearers, but they're gaseous.
Yeah, that's it turns out, that doesn't surprise me. It turns out fighting a fire is quite like fighting a fire. And so you just kind of reset the apocalypse clock every morning when you wake up and go, right, what can I do today? And so it's sort of moved from like rain to wind to so on. And it's good to know, because I don't think we get any substantive rain, or useful rather rain, until about Thursday of next week, and I'm trying to work out what that lines up with. But it's nice that it's gradually ratcheting down with some wobbles. But just meteorologically, the magic that was performed for today, as of now, it's 2:20 p.m. 3 to 5 p.m. is supposed to be extremely high winds, 35 degrees centigrade, like perfect firestorm weather. It's clear, like there's no wind. Which they were not expecting. I've been listening to every update every 45 minutes from the Tasmania Fire Service. And some of the things, I'll tell you this for the people who are doing it, who've been assisting magically. Half the time they say this fire doesn't behave like any fire I've seen before. Sometimes it's even going against the wind. Like, how does that work? I have some suggestions as to how that works. One, the fire is in some sense colonially lit. But secondly, there's a lot of people doing their best. Like, there are a lot of people breathing on this fire, put it that way. And it's amazing. This was the perfect firestorm weather today, starting between 3 and 5, and it's not that bad. We're recording at 2:20 p.m. on a Wednesday, and I listened to the live broadcast from the Huon Council at 12:30 p.m. And they said, so far today, the fire hasn't breached the forest into the fields, and we were not expecting that. So today may not be as bad as we envisioned, and it's weird.
Well,
you have to reset every day.
Yeah. As I was telling you a few days ago, kind of joking, or making a joke out of something that's not a joke. Like, I don't know that I've followed a news story quite this fervently ever. It's like every I've got my like 4 Twitter pages that all actually give me information rather than just Googling and being frustrated. And they're on a whole separate window. And I just refresh all of those when I wake up and like, fuck, the report hasn't come out yet today. It's only 5:00 in Tasmania right now.
Yeah. Well, they're fun to watch. Especially if you sort of like, if you vaguely have someone in the game, it's like, how's this going?
Well, not only, are you near and dear to me, but Geeveston was the last place that Kate and I were before we were home. Like, literally, we've been 2 places. Like, we've just been home since we got home in mid-December. And before that, the last place we were was Geeveston. And so when I see the news reports, it's like, ghost town, downtown Geeveston, deserted, residents flee, and they pan through downtown. I'm like, oh yeah, that's that coffee shop. Their coffee's good, the service is bad. Oh yeah, that's the gas station where I bought cigarettes. Yeah. Like, and then the airwalk,
which is now quite destroyed. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it looks like there's still forest there. I know that there's a lot that got destroyed, but I was like, well, there's some trees still standing. It looks like a forest that got fucked up rather than just burned stumps. Maybe that was optimistic footage. It's like we were there. We were there.
It's a bit of both, and I might as well explain that with my tarot cards. It was funny. One of the things that's made it so unpredictable is that it doesn't have a fire. Well, there's technically a fire front, but it's spot fires are what's like leaping forward. There's hundreds of spot fires, and if the weather was as bad as they're expecting today, it was going to jump the Huon River, which is rather large. So that's the kind of firestorm climate when we get the next bad day, and maybe that's the Mars-Uranus conjunction. That'll probably be more dry lightning, let's be honest. But
there's a bunch of cooling stuff that happens between now and then.
Yeah. But so when I did the tarot card reading of Monday last week, so when I get back from New South Wales and I kind of smell the smoke and have a little bit of a look on the internet, I'm like, this is interesting. And the fire had started way up the valley, or way up towards Tahood. And so I did a tarot card reading for will my farm be destroyed by fire this week? Or like, that was it. I can't remember if I said this week, and that's what alarmed me. And so it's a card for every day. And so the first card is the Ace of Swords. Wind, in particular. The next one is the Ten of Wands, which we discussed is maximum fire if what you are dealing with is thousands of spot fires and embers raining down on a town. So, because maximum fire would technically be like an Ace of Wands. And if you got Ace of Swords and Ace of Wands, you would be dealing with a very different fire. You would be dealing with a large fire heading in one direction. You wouldn't be dealing with a tremendous amount of wind defining infinite fires.
yeah, right. 10 is the maximally developed version of that element.
Correct. And so the next card is the Two of Swords. Should I stay? Should I go? I'm like, okay, so we're evacuating. And the card after that is the Seven of Swords. Now,
So you're gonna go.
Yeah, well, so the Seven of Swords, in a moment of weakness, and why I want to talk about the tarot reading is because kind of like the astrology thing, I'm telling the story of what happened or what is happening, but also there might be useful information in there for people, right? So I do the sort of gestalt or phenomenological tarot reading first. So I can look at this and go, this is wind and fire. This is wind increasing. And it's got fire in the middle and maximum fire. So I'm definitely in the right territory. So even before we sort of jump down into the inherited meanings of individual cards, you look at this and go, so the swords go 1, 2, 7, and in between them is a 10 of wands. This is a fire spread, no question. A fire spread for a spreading fire. So looking at it, those first two things, and I'm like, this is also a daily thing. And the Two of Swords is this card that I just keep coming back to in the most complex ways. I'm like, do you know what? I'm going to trigger it because that card is like a should I stay, should I go? I'm going to trigger it. We're just going to go early. And so we did. We went probably a day earlier than we needed to. And so we ended up coming back for a night. And then we got evacuated properly twice. And I'm like, I can't. Yeah. I couldn't not. I was trying to trigger these cards. And I couldn't not trigger them. And we've had a long discussion. And what's the good thing about, and I'm sorry to say this, Avalon, the good thing about having a tarot professional in the same situation as me is I can just send her, and she does the same, screen or phone photos of a spread, and I don't need to explain anything. And I just send it to her, and she's like, oh, shit. So I had this call with her on the Wednesday of last week where I'm like, give me your best possible interpretation of Seven of Swords. And she's like, okay, thinking. And she's like, what it means is that useful intelligence will be made available to the right people. And she's really struggling with it because she reads like we do, like, let's give you the negative, you know. But we were talking about it, and it's also, both of us, and I said this to Avalon as well, like we also fled with armfuls of stuff, which if you look at the traditional, depiction of it, that's what's happening. This guy is sneaking away from a campfire and stuff.
I find that to be one of the most consistently literal cards. I literally just think of it as the GTFO card,
which happened, right? So the one in a moment of weakness, because we've spoken about this before and I've written about it, I have different card sets that are kind of nicer and ones that are kind of meaner. So like I wouldn't have used, now that I've kind of jailbroken it, I wouldn't have used the Solar Busker cards for this because it would have said you will all perish in a fire and then the fire will sell your farm to ExxonMobil who will then
totally would have. It would have been that card with the dude holding a baby over a fire. Yeah. I would be shocked if that wouldn't have come up.
Yeah, but I also didn't
Don't drop the baby.
Yeah, but I also didn't want to have like the most benign ones, which is like, everything's fine, have a barbecue. So, I use like the Holy Grail one, which I quite like when it's about journeys and adventures and so on, but it does err to the side of nice, or dare I say, how to describe this? Because it's very much about quests and journeying. It's all about the things, the lessons you learn on the way and the allies who come to you and all this kind of thing. So what they had for Seven of Swords can also mean help from allies, surprise or unasked for help from allies. Now, that happened to me personally when I didn't ask anyone. The premium members piled in going like, oh, we're doing these intendings for you. And they worked. Like they caused several amounts of rain last week and so on. But also we have firefighters from the mainland and New Zealand here in the town. And also we're looking at North American and European ones getting here if the fire season continues all through February because we've run out of firefighters, right? So that's where I'm kind of going with. Every single one of those cards came right, went right. And that was the week where, as far as I could tell, the fire wanted to destroy the farm. So I'm now in this kind of daily reset pattern. But it was really fascinating that this is just advice for people, like stay with the total spread and crucially do it phenomenologically, do it with like the actual feel of what these things are. And then you can kind of jump down into traditional meanings. Because at every level, this card reading nailed it.
That's really interesting. So just the people leaving to come help you were also grabbing their shit and leaving, just as is depicted in the Seven of Swords in the Rider-Waite.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and also you could. I mean, maybe you would. I know people out there who've been through the same situation will get it. But that entire week, because I was concerned about how the Seven of Swords was going to land, it is a card of spycraft and espionage and subterfuge, because you are stealing things in the night, right? The town was awash with the most ridiculous versions of rumors, which always happens in that kind of fog of war situation. Like, oh, this guy works with someone at the Woolworths and his girlfriend works at the Airwalk and she says it's gone. And the town was like a whirl in a very Swords sense of like rumors and falsehoods and deceptions, but that just kind of spontaneously generated. It was like, I guess because I held myself to it and refused to pull any more cards. It's got to have been one of the most, accurate's the wrong word, although that's still true. One of the most accurate
hyper
on every
thick, perhaps?
Yeah, hyper thick. I was just trying to go with like a Calvino Castle of Cross Destinies, where each card like manifests in your life as well as predicts it.
Yeah, well, and that's part of the value of sticking with the cards that are dealt, rather than be like, I don't get it, give me another card. I don't get that, give me another card. I don't get that, give me another card. Like, sitting with that card and letting it show you its layers.
Yeah. It's been. Sorry, you go.
So just one more layer to that 7, right? Because it's this kind of in the Rider-Waite, which I primarily use. It's this sneaky dude grabbing about half of his swords and getting out of town. And so, there's the spycraft with like the sneaky dude. That's also the like, it's time to leave.
Yeah.
But because I've been following this story, there was also some dude trying to like break into houses and loot because he knew that they were abandoned, who got caught.
Mm-hmm.
Which if you took a snapshot, it's a sneaky looking dude with a handful of stuff leaving a house.
Yeah. I saw that in the news this morning, and I hope that was it. We made jokes about that because that's what you do in these situations. The last time we evacuated the farm, and there's a tweet that I fucking loved a couple of years ago. I forget which account it was, one of those joke accounts. But it basically was, if somebody breaks into my house looking for money, I'll just laugh and help them look. And like I'm looking around my house going, yep. Help yourself. If I'm leaving it to a fire, like, come on, what do you want? This stuff is insured either way. But I hope that Seven of Swords, I hope that's it. Anyway, it was, because those cards have expired. That was for last week. And now to some extent, I'm off the map. I'm also currently without tarot cards. So even if I wanted to do another spread, I'm like, oh, well, I'll check the astrology. Almost as good.
You didn't bring your cards?
Oh no, I took a bunch of tarot decks, but they're currently with one pile of my belongings, which is in a friend's garage in Hobart, and I'm back down near the valley. So my cards are safe; they're just not with me. Yeah, I wouldn't have left them there. I had that conversation with Avalon as well. I'm like, how many of your thousands of decks are you taking?
Yeah, which decks do you save? So I think probably a lot of tarot aficionados need to ask themselves that question with that much pressure.
I think they should. And she had my book game, but with tarot cards. So, but very much in the same boat. Like, that's why it's been really useful to have someone magically operant to compare that with, because she'd gone through. Her route was different because mine, we just kept moving, so we didn't have that much stuff. She'd intentionally downsized and was planning on living in a tiny home anyway. So you look around and go, well, I'll pack a bag and I'm done. They've got kids, which is a little bit more complex in terms of like keeping valuable things. But well, they want child's toys that are irreplaceable because they're their toy and that kind of complexity, which I definitely don't have.
Oh, I thought you were referring to the children as valuable things that you probably need to take with you,
or not. Yeah.
We shouldn't joke about that. No, I shouldn't joke about it. You can joke about whatever you want.
Yay! Right. And for anyone listening, the kids are fine. They're even further north than Hobart. They were never in danger. Tarot cards, who knows?
So, if you don't mind me just bringing something up, one of the things that being worried about my friend and feeling powerless, or at least not powerful enough, thought about a lot was weather magic and how historically incredibly important weather magic is, and how that's not really part of the discourse. People are into, getting planets to do them favors, summoning this, that, and the other, but like, I don't see a lot of people talking about weather magic, and yet this situation made me realize, like, oh, that's why that's incredibly important throughout almost all of history when people talk about magic.
It's always been pretty prominent for me. I may or may not have broken a drought in the UK about 10 years ago. You'll find that blog post in the archives. I think it's called "Let's Break a Fucking Drought." But I know exactly what you mean. If you have running water and central heating, you don't have. And this has been a big kind of lesson, because I don't. I'm with you on this.
Go ahead.
I'm with you on this. I don't like the Platonic categorization of elements as containers. And you know what I was thinking about driving through the fires and whatever this week? Last year, it might have been around October, you and Kelly and Chris did like a 2-episode run on the Zodiac, on the signs of the Zodiac. And from memory, the way that was articulated at the beginning, and you in particular, it was a very phenomenological understanding of elements, like what fire does and what air does, rather than like air is intellect and water is emotion and those sort of Platonic abstractions. And I've been having a lot of time to think about the ontological primacy of the actual just feelings of air and fire and dry earth at the moment and lack of water, but also still being on a river and will it jump the river? And it's at moments like this that you almost see, even if we make it up, you almost see the sort of archaic lived origins of 4 elements.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Fire, like, you can get to like the internal fire, right, which might correlate with Jung's model or whatever. But when you do that, you're starting with flame and your experience of flame. And if you want to get to what the analog of that is on other levels ontologically, like starting with the actual experience of flame, and that, just the way you phrase that question, like that's an elemental. Can the fire jump the water?
Yeah.
Right. I don't know. That just seems that's a really I don't know. That's a really raw way to phrase it, because that's the question, right? Well, actually, so the question is, can the air carry the fire over the water? Because that's what air does.
To attack the earth, to like burn the earth. Like it's certainly a lot better than sitting there with little tatua symbols and imagining gnomes. Like I wouldn't necessarily recommend this for too long, but if you want like a 4-element school, come to the Huon Valley right now.
Yeah, I'm unwilling to utterly dismiss it, but like the whole like, well, will the gnomes win in the war with the Undines or the Sylphs or the Ifrits or whatever? It's like, I think this might have gotten a little bit too abstract.
It's that extra layer of abstraction.
It's not that elements don't have spirits, but let's not start there.
No, and a cure for that, if you are kind of either you've just learned some things way too long ago and it's probably bad practice, but it's very difficult to unpick that. The cure for that is this sort of this phenomenological exploration of these 4 elements. It's been, and I've been thinking about that a lot. It's fascinating to have it utterly defined by where is the water, where is the fire on the earth, and where is the air taking it.
And doesn't an apocalypse always have to be elemental?
Yeah.
Like a reconfiguration of the raw elements of your world or your situation?
Well, hopefully just minorly reconfigured in my exact situation. But
right, but you're dealing with the fact that things are being majorly reconfigured close enough.
Oh, absolutely. And it is, it continues. It's been really fascinating, honestly. To the point where, who was I talking to yesterday? It might have been Mother. And today, which was supposed to be D-Day, I know a bunch of people did a lot of magic. I did last night. Today was supposed to be the worst day since the worst day of last week.
Yeah, I threw in last night.
Yeah, well, I could tell, but it just so classic. So where I am now has internet, so we can record this, and no phone signal. So I had to email my mother, of course, because she, like, if I'm in a fire area and I don't answer the phone after one ring, it's like, well, he's dead. That's done. So I had to email her so she didn't panic when my phone wouldn't work. Anyway, so as you know...
that was very considerate of you.
Yeah. She'd walk into the frickin' fire if I didn't call her back. Poor thing. But anyway, so this morning I do my usual thing. I wake up in horror at 5 a.m. and go, it's probably not good. Unless it's on the front page of the news, 5 towns burned down. I'm probably not going to get anything until 7 a.m. when the Tasmania Fire Service guy comes on the radio. And the best update is the 7:15 a.m. one, because that's when the guy in the press office gets the reports overnight from the fire teams. That's the one you want to listen to for people who you're following this. And so I'm sitting in this house, and it's 6:59 a.m., and the power goes off, which means there's no internet, and I have no mobile signal. And my car, which doesn't start half the time, as a result, it's the flat battery, which is essentially why it doesn't start, means every time you get in the car, you have to reset the radio and Bluetooth. So basically the sound doesn't work for 10 minutes. It's another thing. And I'm like, oh, God. Of course, this happens today. So I'm racing up the channel to try and find a park or a public area that I could have enough signal to actually listen to the update. And I found it surrounded by firefighters because, of course, the thing that dropped the power from this place was a fire up the channel, unrelated to the bushfire. So 10 kilometers north of me, an apple shed burns down, and they had to cut the power and the internet further south down the channel. And I'm like, oh, God. One damn thing after another. It's been very much my apocalypse. And I'm secretly delighting in it. That's where I was going with this meandering story. Parts of me are, my version of chin up is be honest with yourself that you're enjoying parts of this. You're horrified by other parts, but you're enjoying parts of it.
Well, yeah. And I think part of it has to be that 10 years from now story.
True.
And that 10 years from now, you, who no matter how things turned out, you're still there. You're fine. Right. And so you have this under your belt.
Yeah, that's what Lehman Brothers felt like. I think that's why I secretly like apocalypses. In the sense that... So... Yeah, you go. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, so we really need a tarot deck that has a black swan for the judgment card.
Yeah, yeah, I love it.
a black swan, or a gathering of black swans on a smoky lake.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Do we want to, is there anything else? 'Cause I wasn't sure. This was going to be a solo show, which you gratefully did some actual free work for instead and jumped on. But I think I've told bits about the magic that I'm going to tell publicly. There are other bits for premium members. I might do a separate video, or if not, I'll talk about it on the Q&A next week. Because there's some stuff that's kind of semi-classified. I've told the public bits. We went through the space weather.
Yeah, and there are a bunch of other charts. I feel like it would be a bit pedantic to go through that at this point. Maybe I can just write a little paragraph and give you the data so that your listeners or members who are into that can have those charts and go, oh shit, it's right there.
Yeah.
But I don't really feel like it flows at this point.
No.
To astro-explain it.
No, and you're right. For people who want to deep dive and get their nerd on, we'll give them the raw material.
Yeah, it's there. It's amazing. if you look at the Aries ingress and then the fact that it has a movable ascendant, and so you look at the equinoctial ingress afterwards in Libra, both of them show massive destruction by land, and the one that's most relevant during this time period shows destruction by fire. And the nerds will see that, and we'll post the charts for them.
Wonderful. And if any nerds want to throw in on that, maybe I shouldn't be calling you astrologists, which is what I believe you are called now, nerds. But
not even once.
Not even in your current situation can you use that word. That's our word. But yeah, if anyone wants to kind of deep dive on the numbers and post in the comments or whatever, go for it. Why not? Yeah. Participate in this, whatever this is.
Right. Well, and I mean, and the whatever this is part of it, right? Like you were saying, like what this is having to figure out what it is every morning.
Yeah. It's an apocalyptic Groundhog Day in a way, but not really. It's just a reset. Like you actually just look at what your options are and what the risks are. And so my example is I want the southerly. Because I didn't want the fire front coming to the north, even though my farm is in the south end of town. And particularly if it's a southwester rather than a southeaster, that's bad because it'll bring the sort of bottom of that jaw of fire we were talking about closer to my farm. But there's like a great big dam, not mine, like an actual water dam in between us. And it's a narrower piece of fire. Whereas if we kept the northwesterly happening, that's literally 30,000 hectares of fire coming to a town of 3 streets. So like this little narrow strip, it's weird to kind of assess the probabilities and risks and go, okay, so it is in fact better to bring a smaller amount of fire closer to my house than a lot of fire getting closer from the other side of town. It's been fascinating to kind of divine and enchant in a reactive daily way.
Yeah. And one of the things I was thinking about earlier, and that brings up from a like you're safe 5 to 10 years from now perspective, which is it's fair to take with you now because you're in a good mood, but like it's not what I would present to somebody who was in that situation if I had any consideration, which I try to. But like situations like this, if you're magic, if you're into it and you want to see what it can really do and see how to really do it, like you need this kind of pressure test and this sort of tactical challenge where it's not just like, well, life's pretty good and I enchanted for more customers for my thing and I got, a blah, blah, blah increase, right? Like the pressure's on, there's a timeline, you have to work with the situation on the ground. Like this kind of stuff, I think teaches magic in a way that more like fertile fields and, and sowing seeds doesn't.
Yes, it's, if I may admit, I'm quietly proud, not just of me, because I'm certainly not taking the credit for it in the slightest, but the people who threw in behind it, like the premium members, definitely have game. And it's really, because there's no margin, there's no error. Like, there's one goal, which is like, well, does the farm survive today? And so far it has. It may not, but so far it has. And that reactive way of going about it is one of the things why I'm almost guilty that I'm enjoying it. Almost guilty. But maybe that is a healthy attitude. Maybe like, well, you might as well, if you're going through it, what are you going to do? Wail?
Right. Well, I mean, theoretically, there's a Tao of everything, right?
Sure.
So there's absolutely a Tao of apocalypsing. Black Swan Tao, by the way, is a pretty good name for something.
True. God, what?
I don't know, your memoirs?
No, I've already got a name for my memoirs. They can't all be good.
All right. Well, it'll be, when I'm 130 and everybody I love is dead, and I write down in my chapter of my memoirs where I recount Gordon White. Perhaps that's what I'll name the chapter.
This works. Well, all right, sir. Thank you for the last minute rearranging of your schedule, because I wanted to see if there was another way I could structure just giving people an update on what's going on in a way that's potentially useful. And I think we did. I think we did some Astro, we did some Tarot, and yeah.
Well, yeah, certainly. Your credit as far as asking favors at this particular point in things is extremely high.
That's true.
That's
true. What would you have said no? Yeah,
No, most days I'd be like, dude, I just did a podcast today. Let's do it tomorrow.
Yeah. But yeah, you can't. You can't be like, I still haven't finished The Good Place.
I'd be like, well, but we have finished The Good Place.
I haven't, because my TV's surrounded by fire. But I'll get to
it. Your regularly scheduled programming will return after this apocalypse has concluded.
All right, that's totally where I'm ending it.
Done.
I really do just want to end with a big thank you to everyone who has reached out, particularly those who have been through something like this before, as well as all the premium members who self-organized into various groups, and the people doing their own solo thing, and everyone else who just sent their good thoughts. I've been through various natural disasters before, major earthquakes, cyclones, a very minor avalanche, although I probably shouldn't have put that on the list because, to be honest, it was kind of funny. I've had families caught in tsunamis, and they're all shit, obviously, except for that one avalanche. But for those of you, I guess, who have been through a major fire event, you can attest to the fact that it's relentless. It's a grind. There's not just one big wave and then the cleanup. It goes on for weeks. It is constantly right there, slightly ruining your life until one moment where it might completely ruin it or even end it. So the campaign continues, and like I said to Austin, the clock resets every day. For the astronerds out there, you'll find the charts we looked at in the show notes, and I'd love your input and analysis because, I sure as shit can't do it. And on a magical front, premium members should keep an eye on their inbox because the various Copics, which is to say both Austin and Kate, have dug up and will serve some good electional opportunities to literally bring the rain on another one of our now presumably patented massive hangouts. That's it for now, I guess. Keep an eye on my Twitter account, Gordon_White, or keep an eye on the blog for updates on this particular adventure. Once again, a big thank you for all of your well-wishing and concerns, and sorry if I haven't replied individually. But, I've been otherwise engaged. I have definitely read and appreciated all of them. So, fire or no fire, until next time.